So glad you've joined all of us. Feel free to continue throwing your puns into the chat. I'm Brian Goldberg from the Office of Sustainability. We're helping to lead the campus's strategy efforts with our key partners from facilities and so many of you here to design out waste over the next few years to get waste out of our campus. We've assembled some of MIT's best trash talkers on the call today, and we're also really keen to hear from so many of you to join in this conversation. So Nicole, if you could take us to the next slide, and we'll end our poll. Oh, I have to vote. Okay, I'll just end that. Okay, so welcome. Today is the start of a 2-session IAP. The session is Wasting IAP with Us. We've got these great trash talkers today. As you can see from the schedule, we didn't realize that January 20th was an inauguration, and we didn't think it might be something, it just wasn't on our radars at the time. We want to give space for everybody on the 20th for the inauguration. So we're going to remove our session on the 20th, and we'll combine it with the session on the 27th. So we'll have our session today on talking trash, and then we'll move to the 27th as the next session, which builds on the platform from today, and then gets into how are we actually taking a lot of these steps going forward to design out our waste. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers and trash talkers both today and on the 27th. Nicole, the next slide. So that's the schedule change. This is the new lineup. And I think, I don't know how it works with the calendar invite. Rebecca, maybe you can help us. I don't remember if everybody has the link, or I think the link can be updated in some way for the removing the 20th, and we'll just gather again on the 27th.
The Zoom link is the same for both the 13th and the 27th. Okay,
great. Thanks, Rebecca. So today, next slide, please. So today the session is, we aim to start with some connections, kind of getting each of us connected with each other so we have a better sense of who the community is. And really the hope today is that all of you walk away with a much better understanding of the waste system at MIT. Some of you are real experts. Some of you may be new to MIT or new to waste at MIT. So the aim is you walk out with a much better understanding than when you came in today. We won't be wasting your time. We'll cover both the waste systems at MIT and then also some of the steps we're taking to, like today, education, outreach, and communications to help everybody understand what goes in the waste system and what doesn't go in the waste system. And we'll close with some wrap-ups and next steps. But we hope you walk out today with a good understanding of, a much better understanding of who and how does our waste system work at MIT. The final session on the 27th, we're going to broaden it and take a better look at where we're going as a campus, and then how waste and what we're learning today fits into a broader national picture. And that'll happen on the 27th. I'm going to hand off to Susie Jones from the Office of Sustainability, who will get us to start to connect and learn more about each other. Susie.
All right, you want to move to the next slide? So yeah, before we kick off, just a few community reminders. So I'm Susie with the Office of Sustainability. We work with Brian and Rebecca and Nicole, who are all on this call and ready to help. You can get a taste of what that feels like in the office with Brian's waste puns. And so we all endure that every day and certainly love it. It brings some levity to the day. So I just wanted to run through some quick reminders. We will be recording this session. We got a lot of requests to send out the link afterwards for those that could not attend. We ask that in the parts that are interactive to really share the space. So if you find yourself talking a lot or asking a lot of questions, maybe step back and allow others to join the space. We ask that you just listen respectfully and actively to each other, commit to learning and not debating. And if you're comfortable and willing, we encourage you to update your Zoom name with your pronouns. So some of us have done that to sort of model what that looks like. There's a couple dots that you can click on your image and rename yourself there. And we have an action-packed agenda. So we'll, depending on the flow, we'll either take questions live, but certainly type them into the chat as we go, and we'll be moderating the chat. I invite the people that will be speaking, our experts, to maybe answer questions in the chat as we go. And we'll take any live questions as well to make sure that we're, answering the questions that you guys have. And we did collect all of your questions when you registered, and we have answers to all those questions, which we'll share at the end as well. So next slide. All right, so a big part of today is really about making connections. So that means connecting with the faces and the people that are behind our waste system, but also with the folks in the room today. So especially we think this is important at a time when we don't get to see each other and bump into each other around campus as much. So we want this to sort of have sort of an interactive and fun vibe. We know this is IAP, which really runs the gamut of learning how to tie scarves to learning how, to do particle physics. So we want to sort of land somewhere in between and make this certainly informative, but also a place just to build connections and maybe even, smile and have some fun. So to kick us off, we're going to put everyone into breakout sessions, which at this point people should be pretty familiar with. We'll break you out randomly into groups for about 5 minutes and ask you to just connect with each other. So introduce yourself, and we offered a discussion question here, which is, has the last year shifted your views or behaviors about waste or waste systems? And if so, how? So depending on our lives in the past year, it may have looked very different than it did in previous years. And so what's shifted? And as you're thinking about waste and waste systems, what new issues or behaviors have you been thinking about? And then when we return, feel free to put some of those reflections into the chat, and we'll sort of see where we're at as a community. So on that note, we'll have Rebecca start to put us into randomized groups and spend 5 minutes on these questions and connect with each other. So welcome back, everyone. People are trickling in. We'll give it a couple moments for the rest of you guys all to rejoin us. And as you rejoin us, depending on what you were able to share in that short amount of time, feel free to pop in a reflection, either something that you said personally, or maybe you heard that resonated. And we'll just spend a couple minutes maybe looking at some of the responses. All right, Nicole from our staff, who is also a city councilor in Medford, says, with an increase in takeout and delivery, choosing restaurants based on the amount of packaging they use. So that's definitely something we've seen is in the last year, just as our efforts were ramping up around single-use plastics, I think we've seen an increase in some contexts of using disposables more often as a public health measure. So that's been really interesting. Let's see, what else? Yeah, just a lot, again, expressing that sort of tension we've been feeling, a compromise or some tension around sanitation and COVID safety and sustainability. So that's something as an office we talked about a lot, is sort of like having sustainability and safety be able to coexist. And I think that's a lesson we can really think about moving out of the pandemic as well. Oh, totally. Loss or decrease of community and shared services. Oh my goodness, I feel that. So that was just becoming the whole sharing, community sharing economy, right, was also just ramping up. And it's something that unfortunately we had to sort of step away from in many ways. Totally feel that. People talked about composting, which we'll be able to talk about today. For me personally, I've been really looking at the intersection between environmental justice and waste. So that's something I'm going to actually talk about a little bit later. Black plastic has come up. So yeah, totally. I mean, I think it's been a really, really, really interesting year to be reflecting on waste. And at the end of this session too, we want you to be thinking about sort of what can we carry forth with us in the new world, whatever the new normal looks like, what practices can we adopt sort of moving forward. So be thinking about that too, because I think it's really been an interesting year for some deep thinking and really seeing the impacts of sort of, waste or not sharing and things like that. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide, and Brian is going to come back and actually just a little bit broaden the context for us and talk a little bit beyond just this idea of waste, and then we'll jump into our agenda.
Thanks, Susie, and thanks everyone for your inputs into the chat. Feel free to continue to dump your observations, your waste puns, or even your questions into the chat, and we'll do our best to sort through them. So clearly, a lot of you are thinking about waste and in all kinds of different ways. We want to just help you. Our aim today, again, is to use the campus as our focus, so it grounds all of us in something together. But we're also going to broaden it a little bit beyond waste right now, and then we'll dive back in. So we use the campus and have a common knowledge. The story of MIT Stuff is that all of us, the 70 or so people who are on this call, we're all part of and contributing to the MIT mission of bringing all these wonderful education, research, teaching, knowledge, innovation into the world. That mission requires a lot of stuff to come in, and it requires stuff that goes out as waste. So it's the stuff that feeds this mission, but without the stuff, we don't have the mission. So it's important to ground ourselves that it is this mission that is driving our consumption, but the mission needs things. Nicole, next. So what is the stuff that goes into the system? Well, each of us, when we're on campus or soon to be back on campus at some point, we're buying coffee to power us in the morning. We're buying pipettes for our labs, rubber gloves to keep us safe. MIT buys over about 1 million items in 1 year. And those items come on the order of almost 10,000 packages a month. So that packaging people noted, yes, packaging is increasing and it's a mighty challenge for us. So all the stuff that we need to do the great things we do as MIT, this stuff also has impacts. Next, Nicole. For most of that stuff, a lot of it we end up continuing to use: computers, centrifuges, large pieces of equipment, and it stays as property. There's over 60,000 pieces of property that MIT holds right now in all of our labs and our classrooms. But then at times we reuse those things. There's a site called Reaply, which is something we've set up, which enables exchange of goods. And in 1 year, last year, our first test of Reaply, over 500 different items exchanged hands, large lab items, for free, no cost. And that was over $50,000 in savings. So the stuff can become reused. Next, Nicole. But finally, at the end of the day, even after we've reused some of it, there's still about 3,000 tons a year of trash, stuff that is not recycled, isn't composted, but still leaves the Institute in the forms of utensils or packaging or pallets or used coffee cups. About half of the trash still, if we sorted it correctly, could actually be recycled and reprocessed. Next, Nicole. So as an institute, we're taking 2 steps. On the right, you see the circular graphic that's from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We're trying to literally figure out, how do we design out waste over the next few years at MIT? How do we do this to reduce the impacts? Designing out waste is actually reducing the amount of waste we're generating by reducing the amount of stuff we're actually consuming in the process. We're teaming with all the partners you'll see today to do that. And we're having to affect on the left side the design of our waste systems, the choices each of us gets to make on a daily basis, and a lot of the challenges that we need everyone's help, everybody here on this call, to help us solve for. Next, Nicole. So there are 4 components of a waste system, and if you take nothing else from today, hopefully you'll take this very simple kind of crude graphic, that there's the infrastructure components, the bins, there's the handling of the material, who moves it, the hauling of the material from campus, and then the communications that so many of us need about, wait, what can go in that bin, or what happens, how much are we putting in those bins, and what are we learning, the communications and data. So today, you're going to hear from people representing these 4 components of the waste picture. And then in the next session on the 27th, we'll start to look at where are we going with this knowledge. Next, Nicole. So we're now going to start our first session we have some fantastic trash talkers from MIT's Custodial Services, the Office of Recycling and Materials Management, and RTS, MIT's waste hauler. And this is our chance to learn about first the MIT campus as a waste system, and that's what we'll spend most of the rest of today. And then we'll learn in the next session, where are we going to redesign and modify this waste system to address the challenges that so many of you have raised in the chat and that we've already begun to touch on. Next, Nicole. So when we look at on the left, the mission of MIT, which is composed of all of you and another 22,000 of us, over 170 buildings, and all the material that is used to power the mission, feed all of us in our research and activities in those buildings, it still generates stuff that comes out of the system. And that stuff is on the order of magnitude over the last few years. On average each year, it's about 5,000 tons of waste material. Most of that leaves MIT as trash. Some of that 60% trash can still be, about half of it can still be captured for recycling and food waste. But nonetheless, it's leaving MIT as trash. Another 30% of material leaving MIT is actually separated by all of you in advance, and it comes out as recycling, and a much smaller yet growing percentage comes out as food waste. So that's the large picture in terms of numbers. For those who want to dive in deeper, next session on the 27th, we're going to take a closer look at some of that data, how we're getting it, where it's coming from, and what our hopes are going forward with the data. So the data junkies on waste, stick with us through the next session.
Hey, Brian,
yeah.
We just had one question come in. I think it's good. I know we've all given it a lot of thought, but does MIT have a quantitative goal for how much to reduce campus waste by a certain year?
Yeah, it's a critical question. Thanks for asking it. We all know when we have a quantitative goal, it gives us something to aim for. In a few minutes, you're going to meet Ross from RTS, and RTS is our waste hauler and our partner in designing out waste for the campus. RTS is in their first year of working with us. We're hoping to, over the next year or two, collect enough data, understand our systems enough to then begin to set some targets. But right now we don't have a quantitative goal because we're still trying to get a really good handle on our own system, our own behaviors, and then determine where do we need to go. So very critical question, and we look forward to developing that over the next few years as we learn more. Susie, are we ready to dive into the waste system at MIT? Great. Next slide, please, Nicole. So today you're going to see this crude slide quite a bit. We will be in this session, we'll be focusing on the infrastructure pieces and the handling piece. So first you're going to meet Tom Hardy from MIT Custodial Services and Ruth Davis from the Office of Recycling. And you'll learn about the actual process. Once you, if you were on campus, once you put that coffee cup into the trash bin or that banana peel into the food waste, who does something with it? So we're now going to meet Tom and Ruth, who will talk to us about these two core pieces. And I just want to note, because I don't know that Tom, just to make sure we get to it, Tom has a team of over 260 custodians who service about half the campus. So about 80 buildings on campus are serviced by MIT Custodial Services. And they've just increased recently from 5 days to 6 days. It's an enormous responsibility. Tom's team is leading it. And Nicole, if you can go to the next slide, this is just the intro slide. We'll now meet Tom and then Ruth to talk through how material is handled, how it's actually collected on campus. And Nicole, if you can go to the next slide, and then we'll hand over to Tom.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Hardy from Manager of Custodial Services. Sitting just off to my left here is Pedro. He's the assistant manager, is also joining us today's presentation. We did increase to the 6-day-a-week cleaning when the COVID started happening back in April. So we do operate 6 days a week cleaning all buildings right now. You'll see in the slide, it's an example of how we get the trash from the main group all the way over to Stata's compactors. There's about 20 buildings plus that go into that compactor that we pick up. Probably more than 3/4 of those buildings are pulled in such a vehicle that's called a tug truck. There's 2 custodians that run 8 hours each night, pulling all the trash from the main group and surrounding buildings over to Stata. So that's done by a number of custodians in over 20, 25 buildings. And it all converges onto the Stata dock. It's separated there as regular trash and recycling. And any food waste is also separated out there to associated bins. We go to the next slide. What you see here is another set of buildings. We used a couple examples. As in the previous slide, the main group buildings do certain different functions. This building's here, E14 and E15, many of you are aware of that. Many different uses over there. There's theater, there's event space, there's creative, there's all a touch of research, there's a hobby shop. So we have a lot of things going down into the compaction area. In the picture is one of our custodians, Hannavella. And as you can see, there's a setup of how we separate the trash and recycling as it comes down to the compactors, and the blue bins collect the recycling. There's quite a bit of recycling that comes out of the building, and it gets moved through later on. Ruth will speak to that because her group then comes in and removes it. So the custodian at times is also taxed with having to check the recycling for contamination. So that's one of the issues that arrive with coffees and so on. But the community has been getting better, getting better with that. And we've been able to recycle more. We have a certain downturn right now because there's not a lot of people on campus, but there are a lot of laboratories running. So we do have some work to do daily. That's kind of the overview on custodial. We operate 3 shifts. So our largest shift is a night shift. So that's when most of the trash is moved. Evening shift would come in second, and the first shift would police the trash. So there's always trash moving to these various dumpsters, and we work in concert with Roots Group. Recycling. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I think we'll hand over to Ruth. Ruth Davis from the Office of Recycling and Materials Management.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Tom said, recycling works very closely with custodial services, and E14 is an example of how we interact. The design of a building is really how the waste handling is determined. So a building like this, which is E14, E15, has a very small loading dock materials handling area. So the top picture is a view of what recycling looked like in 1 week in COVID, but that's a slow day during the regular academic year. So we do get a lot of recycling out of E14. My guys come. John Hames is the person who usually picks that up in his Packer truck. He moves it from the inside loading dock area to the exterior, and then he dumps it into the back of the Packer truck. So when times are busy, he does this Monday through Friday. And I have to tell you, they do generate so much recycling there, especially because it's an event space, that we could do two pickups in that building. A lot of cardboard. It would be wonderful if everybody broke down their boxes. As you can see, there's all kinds of boxes hanging over there. If those were flattened, it would fit into the containers better. So that's one thing that we try to encourage people to do. During the regular year, we've got 155 stops. During COVID, we've been doing about half that number. Our recycling is about half. We're still out there. We're still out there collecting. There's a lot of stuff that we're picking up. We do need the recycling to be clean. Clean and empty, that's what we want. We can go to the next slide, Nicole. So recycling materials management handles all of the non-regulated waste. So we do recycling trash and food waste. This is the food waste collection area at Massey. We don't say compost, we say food waste because we're not collecting compost. You gardeners out there know what compost really is, okay? So food waste is collected from the residence halls, the prep kitchens, and some of the cook for yourself kitchens. we get a lot of contamination in food waste. So a lot of people throw plastic in there, and it does get screened out in the process, but it's really best if we just get food waste. So we have the waste watchers who are going to speak later, are very essential part of our education program in recycling, and they have done work with events and dining areas, and we have a pilot that we're going to do in McGregor to try to encourage more undergraduates to collect food waste. So our food waste program is vital on campus, and it is really active. It may be a small portion of what we're currently collecting on campus, but we know we can make it grow. All right, Brian?
Fantastic. Thanks, Ruth. So just as we've heard from Tom and Ruth, and it's an important point that Tom handles, and an MIT custodian handles 80 campus buildings. That means there's about another 80 buildings that are actually handled by a few other custodial shops, such as athletics and housing. And so it's important to understand that this is the complexity of trying to design out waste from a system like MIT, is that we actually have multiple entities leading responsibility over multiple activities. And it's just not as simple as Tom and Ruth are responsible for every single thing on campus from the time it gets thrown out. So we can talk more about that, but it's just an important part as you begin to put a map in your head of the waste system at MIT. So we've heard from, we've learned about kind of the infrastructure piece, the handling piece. Now we're going to hand over to RTS. RTS is MIT's a new vendor partner for both waste hauling and sustainability services that helps us design out waste. RTS, this is their first year with us, and Ross can speak more to both RTS and then just more specifically about what happens once Ruth and Tom are able to get the material to a place where RTS takes it from there. We're following the story of our stuff. So I'll hand over to Ross.
Great, thank you, Brian. We could go off the slide with my name. So as Brian mentioned, RTS, well, first of all, my name is Ross Grumman. My role at RTS is Senior Vice President of Sustainability. And as Brian mentioned, RTS sort of wears two hats with MIT. So we partner with Brian in the Office of Sustainability in looking at how do we design out waste? How do we look at the different materials coming in? How are we tracking those materials? Brian mentioned that data, which is super important. So like, you have to make decisions based off data. So how do we collect data? What does the data show? How do we look at procurement, setting up systems, things like that? Then the other hat is, you know, once waste has been made, it has to be taken off campus. So working with Ruth and the Office of Recycling and her team and facilities, facilitating all their hard work to make sure now all the waste that's in the compactors, in dumpsters, she showed a picture of a Packer truck. So there's trucks coming all over campus every day. RTS alone is running about 3 to 5 trucks every day, just driving around campus, picking up compactors, picking up dumpsters, picking up those green toters with food waste. So it's a lot of work to collect this materials. So with the first hat, if we're starting to design it out, we could reduce the number of trucks on campus. We could reduce the amount of service you need to remove this material, which would help kind of go into reducing GHG emissions. Obviously, just most people don't love having trash trucks drive around their campus. So every truck we could take off the road is a win for everybody. So we could go to the next slide. So like Ruth mentioned, and I'm sure you will hear over and over and over, is the key thing to take away about recycling is it needs to be clean, it needs to be free of contamination. It's inherent upon all of us as users of these systems that we're the ones who clean recycling. Ruth and her team do not clean contamination. When it goes to the facilities, like you see in these pictures, they don't clean it. They actually sort out contaminated recycling. So all recycling is really a commodity. These are different material streams that get sold and sent to different processors for, you know, generally cardboard's made into new cardboard, metal can be made into new metal, things like that. So the cleanliness really goes into the cost effectiveness of recycling. So with cardboard, like Ruth said, please empty it. Often, you have polystyrene, you have those packaging peanuts, anything in the box, unless it's paper, it's trash. So pull it out. Pizza boxes, those greasy lids usually with cheese, tear that off, that's trash. But the clean part of that box is cardboard. So that could obviously be recycled too. Same thing with your bottles and cans. Finish the soda, finish the beer, dump it into the sink. If you have yogurt, just gently wash it out. It doesn't need to be crystal clean, but it needs to be free of contamination so that when it does go to these facilities, the likelihood of it actually being recycled increases. So like all the recycling that RTS and MIT, it goes to the Casella recycling facility where it's dumped on those floors, it's sorted. In some cases, it's sorted by hand. There's people on conveyor belts, and then there's different technology that's looking at different types of plastic, different metals, and paper like that, and it sorts it into different commodities and bales it. And then sometimes it stays here in the United States, and then sometimes it's sold overseas. We go to the next slide. Food waste, organics. Ruth is very correct. We don't call it compost. Compost is sort of the end part of it. That's that fertilizer. So there's a bunch of food waste collection happening right now at MIT. A lot of it is probably not really for your eyes right now. It's in the back of house and dining hall. There's a lot of prep that goes on. There's spoilage, there's overproduction. There's a lot of reasons why food waste might happen. We're trying to, a big part of the other hat is working with Brian and really looking at food and how do we start reducing the amount of food waste being generated? How do we find different avenues for food before it even has to go out in one of these toters? Again, as Ruth mentioned, and as I'll mention again, contamination is the bane of recycling and organics. So really only food waste. If it's something you wouldn't have put in your mouth, it's not something that wants to go into these bins. The food waste that is collected, it goes to a facility called Waste Management Corps, which kind of very generally speaking, makes it into a slurry. All this food waste is just turned into a soup so that it can be processed in anaerobic digester to generate energy. And anaerobic digesting is really, if you think of a wastewater treatment plant, it's the same process. It takes it and it allows it to digest aerobically, and they take that, and the off-gassing helps generate electricity. We'll go to the next one. And then lastly, what isn't recycling and what isn't able to be organics is trash. So dirty recycling is trash. If it's contaminated, even if it's going out in the recycling and it gets to that recycling facility, it's probably turning into trash as well. So coffee cups is something a lot of people have. Coffee cups are trash. Even if it's made out of paper, it's still trash. They're coated in wax. You probably have liquids in it. But that paper sleeve is recycling. The top of the coffee cup is also trash. Trash has a lot of different places it goes. In some cases, it may go to what we call waste energy. So it's actually burned, and that does generate energy. It also has some other impacts, which I think Susie will go into. And if it doesn't go to waste energy, it goes to a variety of transfer stations. And you can see the picture of that pile. So a transfer station is really a big tipping floor where they come and dump out all the trash, and then it gets repackaged into bigger, cube trucks and things like that. And it goes all over the country to be landfilled or burned across the state. So working upstream to reduce how much we have to put into waste energy or put into a landfill is really what our ultimate aim is. And that's it for me.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ross, for helping us understand where stuff goes on the hauling side. And just want to acknowledge there are some helpful questions that have emerged in the chat. And so we're taking some of those questions, a number of them around communications, and we'll be speaking to those in this next session soon to follow within a few minutes. So finally, we'll hand over to Susie, who's now going to walk us through some of the human health impacts of the hauling. The waste goes to the places Ross described, and there's some human health impacts for us all to be aware of. Susie.
Great, thanks. Nicole, you can, go to that first slide. So I mentioned at the kickoff of this session that, we've been thinking a lot about connection and really needing to connect with each other during the pandemic, one of the other themes that's really certainly risen to the surface in our conversations throughout the year has been around social, racial, environmental justice. And so we're taking that lens to our work, I think, more intentionally this year than perhaps we did in the past. So in that vein, I think it's worthwhile to just sort of open up this discussion. We, again, are just emerging with these conversations. But in terms of sort of the environmental justice aspect of our waste system, once we can't reduce our waste any further or divert it to compost or to a reuse venue or to any other place, the rest of our stuff goes to an incinerator or a landfill. And it doesn't just like magically disappear, right? So there's no throwing it away. It doesn't just disappear. So where does it go? So if it ends up someplace in Massachusetts, it's likely going to one of these places that you see on this screen. So this map was put together by some researchers at the New School, and it shows that 6 of the 7 incinerators in Massachusetts are located within a 3-mile radius of an EJ, or an environmental justice community, which is really categorized based on thresholds of race and income levels. So there's plenty of research that demonstrates the human exposure to hazardous air pollutants, which we're not going to name all of them, but they're well studied and they exist. So these facilities do emit at varying levels hazardous air pollutants that can result in some pretty serious health impacts. And if folks have been reading public health news lately, we know that being exposed to those health impacts and developing some health issues around those can actually really impact our ability to fight off respiratory viruses, for instance. And so we see disproportionate impacts to those. So not only health, but also water quality. We're seeing where these facilities are located, that it can actually impact sort of ground source water that we're drinking as well. So which communities in our state of Massachusetts, in our country, around the globe, are bearing the brunt of the negative impacts from our consumption? And who are the real waste experts that should be helping drive policy? And if we're looking to create sort of a healthy planet where everyone has the ability to thrive, these are really important elements to consider in our work and learning at MIT. And I believe that the more we, as an office, look deeply into this, I think the stronger the case becomes for designing waste out of our systems. Next slide. So if you're starting to do some research or have family or friends, or you grew up in areas with an incinerator nearby you, such as Saugus, Massachusetts, I think you're going to start to see some interesting layers to the waste story. And at our office, like I said, we're interested in asking these questions, learning more about human health and environmental justice impacts of our systems, collecting that data, understanding the sort of human health metrics and social justice issues surrounding these. And we really ask, for your engagement, ask us questions like this, help us collect the data. We have fellowships that are exploring these issues so that we can really have a better understanding of the full story. And I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Susie, and thanks, Nicole, for advancing. We have a few minutes for questions. I'd invite you to put the questions in the chat. We've answered a few of them so far. Let's see. Alex has a question. Do any of these incinerators have some sort of, I believe CCS, is that carbon capture and sequestration, Alex? So Susie or Ross, I don't know if you happen to know the answer if CCS is even, if carbon capture is a concern from incinerators.
So I don't know about carbon capture. I know that facilities of a certain age are required to have sort of like stricter air scrubbing filtration qualities to them. If you look at the Massachusetts facilities, they're quite old. And so my understanding, and I am not an expert, is that they kind of have been grandfathered out of some of the newer technologies around environmental, reducing negative environmental impacts. I don't know about carbon sequestration, but again, just super interesting questions to dig into, and I'll let others, if they know, pipe in, chime in.
And I see Jeremy Gregory just chimed into the chat that these facilities do not include carbon capture as air quality is their primary objective. One other question that's come up around food waste, and I'll try to answer this and invite Ruth or Ross to follow. Food waste it's as Ruth noted, it's being collected primarily from the back of house, meaning dining halls. And there are some efforts to grow food waste collection around campus. We're going to be testing out a few locations, as Ruth noted. And another pilot activity we'll be learning about is signage and communicating what can go in the bins and what cannot. And there have been many messages over the years about what can go into a food waste bin because it depends on where that food waste is going. In terms of MIT, as we move forward, we will be communicating more clearly that we are only accepting food waste in the bins, not compostable plates, not compostable cups, not paper plates or paper cups, because a compostable symbol may not actually mean they're compostable depending on the facility that processes. So the simplest language moving forward is that as we start to test and change our signage over time, it will take time. We're only collecting food waste in the food waste bins. If it's not food waste, it doesn't go in there.
Brian, a really good question came in that I know as residents of NE49, we ask this question a lot. So maybe Ruth or Brian can tackle this one, but how is waste from offices in leased spaces handled differently at MIT?
The leased spaces have a management company who's responsible for the waste disposal of those buildings. So the only material that my office handles the removal of in leased spaces is electronics. We remove electronics for any office from MIT. So leased buildings have a property management company.
Which as a result means that property management company may have a completely different set of rules about what they accept in their recycling. And so when you find yourself in those situations and you get frustrated, take a breath. And part of the reason is it's not Ruth's team that's actually even managing that building.
Exactly.
So that's part of the challenge of designing out waste at MIT. Susie, what else is emerging from the chat?
So I know there were a couple questions just that came up earlier on in the presentation just around, oh, I didn't know we were supposed to break down cardboard, or I didn't realize it was food waste only. So I think those are great questions, and there were some tips, there was some, suggestions for greater communications. I don't know, Ruth, if you want to tackle that, but in the second portion of this session, we will talk about standardizing some of those messages. But yeah, like we didn't know about cardboard, and like totally, I mean, there's so much, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yep. No, it's a constant effort to educate the community on what's the best thing to do. So we've had posters on our website that people can download. I want to give a shout out to the Working Green Committee. I looked at the list and I know we've got several representatives from the Working Green Committee. We have Working Green ambassadors in different departments who spread the news. So we welcome anybody when we're all back on campus. If you want to become a Working Green ambassador and be the representative from your department to help educate people in your department, we welcome you. Give a shout out to my colleague, Rebecca Fowler, who is the co-chair of the committee along with Gianna Ferguero Hernandez, and also the Waste Watcher group. I just can't say enough good things about the Waste Watchers. They're a group of students who are helping us, and I really feel that we're going to be able to get to where we want to go with the help of the undergraduate group, the Waste Watchers. So they're a paid group who works for my office, and they've done great work so far. We were doing so well last spring. We did work over the summer and into the fall, and we've got stuff going on. So we are working on educating the community. So spread the word, everybody here, tell somebody about breaking down your boxes, about not putting coffee cups in the recycling. Word of mouth is a great way to spread news.
And I'll just jump in, Brian, one quick, just a follow-up from Lynn about leased spaces.
Yeah.
Just one quick story is that in our previous home at NE49, which was a leased building, that Harvey Waste Management Company was the contractor there. And VPF, whose space we really inhabited, so the Vice President for Finance's office, had a green team and organized themselves to really understand exactly what we're doing here at this campus scale, really took the leadership to understand what was happening at the building scale and to understand the rules, to understand what messages needed to get out there, to integrate a food waste collection system into that building. So VPF's green team is a great model for that. And if people, sometimes ask, well, what can I do to, make a healthier future? In leased buildings, in some cases, it is that sort of like, organizing amongst your, the people, the like-minded individuals, and forming a team and kind of, doing that, taking that leadership into your building. So we have some great models for that, and happy to talk more after. Sorry,
Yeah,
Brian.
and
Had to drop the VPF crew.
And Lynn, thanks for your comment from Matimco. Yeah, Matimco is a wonderful partner, and Matimco is one of the managers of some of the leased buildings. So we look forward to continuing to work with Matimco and others to try to align practices. So it takes time. We ask everyone to be patient and just join us, roll up sleeves, and dive in with us. We cannot cover all the questions we have the time for today. Just want to thank our trash talkers of Ross, Susie, Ruth, and Tom today for this session on MIT's system. We're going to capture these questions, carry them forth. And now we're going to move into the next part of the wheel here, which is how do we communicate effectively all these ins and outs of waste that we've been trying to answer today? How do we effectively communicate that? And who better than our lead trash talker from a communications perspective, Nicole Morell from the Office of Sustainability, who is our communication specialist. So Nicole, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. I think I have an appreciation for Vanna White after this. Hitting the buttons is not as easy as it seems. So thanks everyone for bearing with me as I advance slides. I'm Nicole Morell. I'm the communications specialist in the Office of Sustainability. I want to thank Brian, Tom, Ruth, Ross, and Susie for that really in-depth and helpful overview of the basics on waste at MIT and powerful insight on the through line of social justice, I think all which shows that the basics are anything but. So I'm going to transition us to talk about education, outreach, and communication. But before I do that, before I introduce our two groups who are focused on this, which is MIT's own Waste Watchers and our new partners at Recycle Across America, I want to walk you through just a collage of visuals to highlight just how important communications are to designing out waste. So take a moment to look at these signs. There's visuals, icons, words on each of these signs. And each of these signs, is visually appealing in its own way. And they're all trying to communicate the right thing to do in different ways. But how effectively they do that is definitely debatable. A sign communicating the right thing to do in one building or one city may look completely different in the next. And it makes you unsure as to what counts as compost, what's food waste, or it can even inspire existential dread as you debate what to do with that insulated paper cup, let alone the tea bag that you have inside of it. So these signs just highlight some of the communications challenges that are wrapped up in waste. And communicating to broad audiences about waste are often specifically related to that point of individual decision-making. So behaviors that can be driven or even unintentionally undermined through design, terminology, storytelling, and face-to-face communications. So these focus areas are so important because, as many of you know from experiences at MIT and beyond, you can design the most beautiful backend or operating system to solve a problem. But if part of that solution relies on human beings and people not involved in the process, you're going to need to communicate effectively to them to get them to take the right desired action to support that beautiful solution. So as you've seen so far, partners are key to this whole system. And then working in the Office of Sustainability, we kind of get this broad view of a lot of partners that are working to this goal of designing out waste. So to name a few, Department of Facilities, the Waste Watchers, which, as Ruth said, is actually managed out of her office and under her great stewardship. The Office of Sustainability, our new partners at Recycle Across America, are just some of the people engaging, communicating about waste on campus. As was touched on briefly, there is also word of mouth. apocryphal tales, unfortunately, and then kind of also just mimicking one another, seeing what someone does ahead of you as far as how they're disposing or sorting their own waste. So in the Office of Sustainability, we do our best to facilitate a collaborative approach to communicating about waste, which is why I am now going to hand it off to two of our partners who are doing impressive and impactful work in this area. And we're going to start with the Waste Watchers. So I'm going to hand it off to Natalie, Suki, and Amelia to take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole, for the introduction. We can go to the next slide. So just to kind of recap what Waste Watchers are, and thanks Ruth for introducing us earlier, but Waste Watchers is a student-led group of waste educators. So we work with Office of Recycling and Materials Management as an educational branch to kind of help communicate what waste sorting guidelines are to the MIT community at large. So not only do we work with Office of Recycling and Materials Management, we work with the Office of Sustainability. We work very closely with MIT Dining and Bon Appetit. And we also work with other undergraduate groups and graduate groups on campus, like the Undergraduate Association Committee on Sustainability and the newly formed Student Sustainability Coalition, which is a coalition of organizations at MIT that work to bring sustainable behaviors to the way MIT is operating. And one of the things that we pride ourselves in the most is being on the ground change makers. So we work very closely near waste receptacles and with the people that are interacting with the system so that they can ask us any questions that they have. We can be really physically interacting with what people are experiencing and how they're approaching it, and also what items they end up having when they're going to throw out waste. So if we go to the next slide. This looks something like what Nicole was just talking about. And we kind of use a communication strategy that thinks about how humans behave and how a waste system will interact with that. So in yellow, the first two components of our strategy we'll be talking about today. And then I think the second two we'll be touching on in the next session. But the first thing we do is face-to-face communication. And this is how Waste Watchers was founded, going to events across campus and interacting with the attendees at the events to help them sort the waste that they're experiencing specifically at that event. And then the second is signage, which is something that is a huge part of waste communication. And we work specifically with campaigns and with new waste streams or waste items that are coming up to design signs to communicate how to sort them. And then the last two I'll just briefly touch on are campaigns, which allow people to practice sustainability by actually experiencing something new. So a small population and a very simple behavior. And then the fourth is policy work. So working to make the institutions that people are interacting with more friendly for sustainable behaviors. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Suki to talk specifically about our face-to-face communication.
Thank you, Natalie. Next slide, Nicole. Thank you. So like Natalie said, working at events is really where Waste Watchers really took off. Waste Watchers have staff events such as the first year orientation, Winterfest, Climate Symposia, and more. And we also staff different dining halls and cafes when we do have the time and the capacity. How it works for staffing events is that every semester, all the Waste Watchers go through a rigorous workshop that fills them in on the most up-to-date MIT waste disposal rules. Then we work to dispatch these student Waste Watchers to different events to interact with guest goers, just like how you see in these pictures where Waste Watchers are standing by waste receptacles, helping any event goer that might be nearing the trash and be confused. And we find the strategy particularly effective for two reasons. First, of course, the education is more impactful in person. One of the main missions of Waste Watchers is to influence correct waste disposal behaviors on MIT campus. And for us, it really sometimes takes as little as 3 seconds to correct a waste disposal behavior at these events. Second, we as Waste Watchers learn a lot from these on the ground work at events. And what exactly do we learn? Next slide, Nicole. Thank you. Two things. So first, we learn about the points of confusion that people experience when they throw out waste. So where are actually people getting confused and what can we change about it? Some of the most common examples and comments that we have gotten is, if everything goes in trash, what's the point of us even trying to follow the waste receptacle rules? Another one, and we'll talk about it more later, is there's a lot of confusing signages at waste bins. So which one do we trust and who do we trust? And third, rules change all the time. Why are they changing? How do we even keep up with it? And the second thing that we learn is what people actually want to know, particularly in the MIT community. So how can we as Waste Watchers and the greater MIT administration organizations best communicate with event goers and daily trash goers? They want to know where exactly our trash actually goes. So after it gets thrown into the trash can, where does it get picked up? How is it processed? And why do we have to follow these rules? And the second thing is, why are certain items recyclable but not other items? And why does it differ based on geographic location? These are all questions that we always try to actively answer. And like working at events and educating the MIT community sits at the core of what Waste Watcher does. And with all the experience and feedback we gather from working at these waste receptacles, we really take them to influence our other waste strategies. I'll pass it off to Amelia to talk about one of these strategies next.
Thank you, Suki. Next slide, please. Thanks. So as Suki mentioned, one of our other core Waste Watcher strategies is creating and influencing signs across the campus that help dictate and educate the MIT community about where waste goes. So especially in COVID and due to the lack of in-person events, these posters have really allowed communication without having to have someone there, a waste watcher, whether that be a waste watcher or another MIT staff member. So here are some examples of past posters that have actually been created by some members in Waste Watchers. So we see the first poster is a guide to PPE disposal. So this poster was created in response to the pandemic. So we noticed an increase in waste stream contamination, specifically with PPE. And we see in the second sign, we addressed earlier, contamination of recycling streams. And this poster was designed to be placed across campus to affect that. And so we see with these three different signs, their goals and the reason why they were created are different. However, we also noticed that there isn't a clear structure and an expectation for viewers when looking at them to understand who created this sign and a kind of an organization for viewers. And over time, this has allowed Waste Watchers to kind of notice and see places for improvement. So in our most recent sign, a guide to PPE disposal, we have included a QR code. And essentially this QR code will connect viewers to additional resources if they would like them. Also, we have logos, 2 logos present so that people who are looking at the sign know that it can be trusted, know which organizations on campus are distributing this information. Next slide, please. So expanding a little bit more on the benefits and drawbacks of signage. We see that there is no in-person communication required for signs. And this essentially allows for a broad influence across campus. Signs can be put up anywhere at any time and interact with viewers. Further, as we saw in the QR code in the previous poster, they can connect people to resources. However, inherently with signs come a few drawbacks. They're brief and passive. The brevity of signs is necessary in order to communicate this information in an engaging and effective manner. So what can we, as Waste Watchers and as a greater MIT community in waste, fix? And that's the issue of standardization. So we have tried to delve into this in the realm of Waste Watcher influence. So as an example, in the previous slide, we saw the PPE disposal poster to include the logos and a QR code to standardize the poster and have viewers understand where it's coming from. However, in order to influence this change and these changes across the MIT community and address all signs relating to waste coming from all different organizations is a larger endeavor that we are working as not just Waste Watchers, but as an MIT administrative waste goals with Recycle Across America to address this issue. And with that, I'll pass it off to Recycle Across America to talk a little bit more about what they do.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us to the efforts that MIT is putting out to help reduce waste and to fix recycling. My name is Mitch Hedlund. and I am with the nonprofit organization Recycle Across America. You'll see in the next few slides what our purpose is. This is an organization I started about 11 years ago for the very reasons that you're discussing today. Kind of a constant theme is contamination and confusion. So as we proceed through the slides, hopefully we'll share a little bit more as far as what can be done to fix these issues. Again, on this first slide, you can see that our primary goal is to make recycling possible and very easy for people to start recycling right wherever they are. Next slide. As you've heard in the last 40 minutes or so, that confusion that we all feel, not just at MIT and maybe at your home, but across the country, the confusion as far as what is recyclable and what is the proper way to recycle and to compost. It's a universal issue here in the country. And so in the last decade, contamination levels for recycling has been extremely high, and therefore it has really led to the overall failure of recycling as an industry in the US and globally. This is not just a US issue. Some of the clippings that you see on the left side of the screen show just some news articles that were happening even 5 and 8 years ago. So the writing was on the wall that recycling was too confusing, too contaminated, and therefore too expensive to be effective. This in turn led to a global recycling crisis because recycling is not just a US system, it's actually part of often an international system. So much of the recyclable materials that were leaving the US were so filled with garbage that the purchasers of US recycling stopped purchasing them. So you might have heard about China rejecting US recycling due to high levels of contamination. The whole system started to fail due to this contamination issue. So next slide, please. What I recognized about 11 years ago, which is why I started this nonprofit, is that the first point of recycling, which is when you and me and 380 million people walk up to a recycling bin in the US to act on our good intentions, that first interaction with recycling, which is the recycling bin, is too confusing for us to actually be able to recycle properly. So the images on the left is just an example of what recycling bins look like in the US. Bins look different, colors of bins look different, labels on bins are different from one bin to the next, not just one school to the next or one community to the next, but actually even often between one bin to the next within a building. And in some of the slides that we just looked at, even on MIT's campus, in some of the slides that were presented, I could see that there's about 8 different types of labels and different types of bins that are presented. And that's not shaming MIT, that just is what's normal across the country from one bin to the next. There is no consistency. The cluster of images to the right is an example of additional signage that's often used on household recycling. Again, there's just no consistency. Even if the rules are the same for recycling from one bin to the next, the labels look different. And so as a result of that, recycling really has been designed to fail. I just want to point out that recycling, when it's done properly, has the ability to do some of the most important improvements for the environment. It really can help reverse climate change. It can be one of the most impactful ways of reducing waste going into oceans. It can, curb deforestation. There's so many great things that can happen when recycling works. But when it's presented to be this confusing for everyone, everywhere, it doesn't work. Next slide, please. Okay, I might have a little delay on mine. I'm not sure what the next slide that you're seeing, so I'm just going to see if I can pop through. So the next slide you might be seeing right now is just an example of what that confusion leads to, which is heavy amounts of garbage, trash going into recycling bins. There's a news clipping on the left side of the screen that shows that one rather small recycling facility, they deal with 550 tons of garbage going into that recycling center every day. And so, as what's been shared before, the economics of recycling is crippled and actually destroyed because of that garbage. And the quality of the materials is often destroyed. The quantity is reduced for good recyclables, and the cost becomes so prohibitive that a lot of manufacturers can't choose to use those recycled commodities again. So, you know, from the first point of interaction with recycling, when we walk up to a bin, if it's confusing for us, we are making mistakes, we're not taking it seriously, and we're often throwing garbage in with recycling, and it kind of breaks the whole system after that. Next slide, please. And I mentioned this before, but just one of the impacts of recycling failing is pulls at all of our heartstrings. You know, we all know about the waste and recycling crisis. When China stopped purchasing US recycling and made that global announcement that they were going to ban the purchase of US recycling and recycling from other countries, that was January 2018. Shortly after that, reports came in that recycling, the collapse of recycling globally was increasing the amount of waste going into oceans. So before the recycling crisis, it was known that about 48 million pounds of waste was going into recycling bin, or was going into the ocean each day. That number has increased to 61 million pounds of waste going into the ocean each day since recycling has started to collapse, and that number has gone up since COVID due to PPE waste. So it seemed quite simple that if we could fix the confusion at the bin, then we might be able to change recycling and make it more effective and easier for the public to do properly. So we launched a standardized labeling system for recycling bins that help people recycle right. Next screen. Just take a moment and imagine if there were no standardized road signs anywhere in the US, and literally every university, every school, airport, house, business, sports stadium, if everyone had to redesign a stop sign to make sure that people could stop properly, it really wouldn't work. And fortunately, we do have standardized road signs. Even if the rules are different from one road to the next or one community to the next, we're all able to change our behavior instantly without even thinking about it everywhere we go because of standardized road signs. So we really are appealing to the federal government and the United Nations to adopt the same standard concept for recycling. Next slide. Currently, we have 9 million standardized labels in use on recycling bins across the country. The idea is to have it everywhere. And so we're working on that right now. But the more that it is throughout society, the easier it will be for everyone's recycling programs to actually be effective. Because we will, as the general public, we will be able to start seeing a standardized format for how to recycle properly at each bin. Even if the rules are different, the standardized format and the iconology and some of the methodology that's on the standardized labels help us to be able to respond to those changing rules instantly, just like we do with standardized road signs. Next screen. Impact is always what it comes down to, right? So these are just 3 examples of the impact of the standardized labels. In one public school district, Las Vegas, actually, that school district saved $6 million in 2 years when they started using the standardized labels. Their recycling levels increased so much and their trash hauling decreased so much. And their recycling capture was cleaner, much cleaner with less contamination. In the national parks that are now using the standardized labels, they've seen a 100% increase in their recycling levels and dramatic decreases in the amount of contamination. In the 2018 Super Bowl, they used the standardized labels. Their recycling levels went from 24% highly contaminated, and after the labels were installed and they removed their labels, that recycling level went to 83% with very clean recycling. And it was the first zero waste Super Bowl in history. Next slide. And we just want to thank MIT again for inviting us to be part of your efforts and to support this mission. We are excited to continue to help you reach your goals, and hopefully you see some logic in the concept and implementation of standardizations in communication on bins for recycling. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mitch, and for sharing for Recycle Across America and to Waste Watchers as well. I do want to highlight, so MIT is working with Recycle Across America for a few pilot projects around campus to work with this signage and really track its impact. So I'm going to hand it back to Brian right now, who I think is going to shepherd us through our kind of last 10 minutes or so of the session.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Recycle Across America and Waste Watchers. So just as we kind of take stock of where we've come, we've learned about the basics of MIT's waste as a system, some of the challenges and complexities and the gaps. We've now learned about our efforts to start to work with national partners like Recycle Across America and incredibly inspiring students like Waste Watchers to communicate more effectively around waste. And we're now going to move to I think, Susie, am I going to hand off to you at this point? And we'll, I don't know if you were going to do our closing activity or
Sure.
questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just got a Slack from you, Brian. Just in our continued hope to be connecting people and putting faces to names and understanding the systems at the same time, we have been collecting all of your questions. We will get those answers back to you. And one question that did come in was actually about our radioactive waste. And we were so fortunate to see that Mitch Galanik from EHS, who's our radiation safety expert, signed up for this session. So if he's still on the line, we thought it might be nice to take 1 minute to answer that question in person around some of that types of waste that Ruth's team is not managing. Brian, were you gonna jump in?
Yeah, I think Mitch just, he just told me he had to jump.
He just left.
So in short, there's other waste materials such as I don't want to say more hazardous, but just waste that is many people think of as medical waste or radioactive waste. And those are waste streams that MIT certainly deals with and has a lot of controls in place for. Those are managed by environmental health and safety, and those are tracked kind of by environmental health and safety. It's a much smaller number of the overall tonnage of waste that we've been speaking about so far, but it certainly is waste that when it's processed, it travels all over the country in its processing. Mitch will be joining us for the next the next session on the 27th of January. So if someone has more specific questions, Mitch is happy to help join and respond at that time.
Thanks. That always seems to happen to me whenever I get so psyched to hear from someone. They always seem to drop off. Special guests, I don't know what it is. But so one question that just came in that I thought is an interesting one, and I know that Ross is answering it in the chat now, but there was a question, you hear this term zero waste a lot, and so there was a question around what does zero waste mean? And Ross just answered that as being zero waste, 90% diverted from landfill and incineration. I don't know, Ross, if you want to jump in and maybe just talk about that term zero waste for a moment.
Yeah, kind of like the word sustainability, it can mean a million different things. So true. So LEED is a certification by the U.S. Green Building Council, and they also do TRUE, which is a zero waste certification. and they have defined zero waste as diverting materials away from landfills and incineration by a minimum of 90%. So zero waste in that sense doesn't mean you're not creating waste. The systems still have inefficiencies. It's very hard to design out inefficiencies, but it's really about not sending waste to landfills and incineration. It's driving different values for those material streams. So ideally, we're still reducing. The ideal world is we actually make zero waste, but what we do create, we divert away from landfills and incinerators.
Thanks, Ross. So Nicole, maybe can you jump to the slide that sort of has the reflection question on it as well? So I know we're really rounding the corner, nearing the end of this session. So certainly keep your questions coming. We wanted to have some time to talk about sort of what are the top 10 actions that we can all take and what should our 2021 New Year's resolution be. But I think rather than rush that, we definitely want to crowdsource those questions to some of our experts here. So maybe in the chat, if Ross and Jeremy, who's one of our absolute experts on our team, who's been helping us so much around quantifying the impact of our waste streams, could put in some like, what if you could say to the community one thing they could do on waste this year, what would that be? So maybe type some of those actions in, share your expertise. And then for other folks, again, some closing reflections. This is really helpful for us too, as we shape our portfolio. And so much of what we do is inspired by the community and what issues they would like to drive. So, and in terms of a closing reflection, when we all return to campus, what's one thing that we could do differently and to design out waste? And maybe this year has created an environment where we feel like taking that action is much more sort of feasible than maybe we thought before, like maybe, making our lunch every day and not generating so much single-use waste is possible after a year of making our own lunch, for instance. So type in some of those questions as well. And then maybe, I think is there a next step slide, Nicole? I don't know if the slide that made it into the presentation about just sort of the next session too being rescheduled and just putting that time up. I guess it didn't get in, but yeah, Nicole, maybe you could go to that first slide that has the just the reminder about January 27th at the way beginning too. Just showing that new date.
With me.
Oh, sorry. I know it's tough with the Google slide projection too. But so a comment that just came in from Ross, think about your consumption. Can you reduce the waste from your choices? Can you take 15 seconds to be sure recycling is clean? And can you fix or borrow something rather than buying it? So one thing we talked about at the City of Cambridge this morning on a meeting too was that this year has been a great time to spend cleaning out our closets and finding items that are maybe gently used but could have a second home. So there's lots of resources out there in your communities, lots of people in need that you can sort of divert a lot of these things to a second home rather than putting them in the trash. Reuse, thank you, Rebecca. Reuse wherever you can. Place group Amazon orders with your pod. Reduce the number of boxes being sent every day. Thank you, Suki. And what a good lesson that maybe we could carry into our return at MIT. That's a strategy we've always wanted to test out was, can we get offices and buildings to start sharing purchasing days so that fewer boxes get to the campus and fewer truck trips. Working with our vendors to design out waste. Thank you, Brian. We can always ask, we all work with so many different vendors and all of them are thinking through these issues as well. So just asking them, what can you do for us to reduce waste or design out waste from our system? So I know that was a lot, kind of a popcorn style, a lot of ideas, a lot of questions. We're so excited to have all of your participation today. And just as that final reminder, if you missed the beginning of the session, we did decide to merge session 2 and session 3 to January 27th and leave January 20th as a day to spend with our democracy, if that's what we're being called to do. So January 27th, we'll all meet back here with a whole range of special guests, and we're really excited to see you then. Brian, you want to close us out?
We hope that we didn't waste your time. We hope this was well worth your time. And we look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. Thank you all for spending time with us and dealing with my annoying waste puns.
All right, take care, everybody. Thank you.